Welcome back, colleagues. We are excited that you're back for another snapshot as we continue to dig deep into evaluation and assessment strategies that are going to help us not only become better educators, help us engage students on this learning journey, but also it helps our students advance their knowledge skills and helps them become a safer practicing clinician. If you haven't already, you want to go ahead and print out that study worksheet. You're going to include on that study worksheet today's date, whatever date you're watching this snapshot. Okay, so this is the actual study worksheet. It's listed right here in the description. And then you're going to write down what is the objective? What is it that you want to achieve at the end of our time together today? And hopefully you'll have several takeaways, but I want you just to identify simply one objective that you want to achieve at the end of our time together today. So let's go ahead and jump in. We always like to use Billings and Halstead Teaching and Nursing to really clarify our muddy points and also to make sure you have evidence-based content that is going to help you close your knowledge gaps. Okay, we're going to explore a thought-provoking question as well. So, but let me cover a few facts about the rubric process and ultimately the rubric framework that we're going to be talking about today. All right, so first and foremost, I want you to think about your students. Oftentimes they get confused, or maybe it's just my students that get confused about the content. But we know what the real problem is based on data, based on statistics that I'm going to share. And that is when it comes to assignments that have a rubric or should have a rubric, that there's some missed opportunities. So that's exactly what we're talking about. We're going to talk through what are those three most common mistakes, and most importantly, how do you avoid them when you're thinking about what tools, what framework we're going to use to help our students understand what we expect in that assignment and what they should not include in that assignment. Okay, so we're going to explore how can we as educators truly fix these problems so we can finally stop playing what I like to call academic referee, right? We want to start building clarity, confidence, and competence as it relates to the formula and ultimately the content that we're looking for to be included in our rubrics. So first of all, let's talk about one of the key mistakes, which is if our rubrics are too vague. Okay, so if they're too vague, it can cause students to be unclear about exactly what it is that we're looking for in that assignment. All right, and now I want you to flip over before we get too deep into our content. So number one is vagueness of the rubric. I want you to turn to chapter 16, and this is the 6th edition. The reason why we use the 6th edition is because that's the one that was mapped to the actual CNE exam blueprint for the version that in 2025 that our colleagues are currently taking. All right, so when you look at page 290, it talks about under the section of writing, teaching tips. Now, I teach at the graduate level predominantly. And so what I see is students including a lot of content in their paper that is not aligned with the specific objectives that I'm expecting them to complete as part of completing that assignment. So this is what chapter 16 really talks about, which is strategies that we can not only promote student engagement, but also active learning. And our ability to have clarity with our students about what's expected in an assignment is a part of the learning journey, right? Because that's oftentimes with assignments, students are closing their knowledge gaps, they're bridging that theory practice gap, hopefully, in an effort to increase their comprehension and decrease their muddy points or decrease any content that they're not clear about. All right. So what it says is when we teach students how to write, this may increase the quality of their papers. Time spent on grading can be decreased with a grading rubric. All right. I know I have all the hands up when I ask this question. How many of us could appreciate time back in our day by having a more efficient grading process? And more importantly, to have students submit papers and assignments that answer the questions that align with the objectives that we expect them to. That is the beauty of having an effective rubric. It allows exactly that to happen. Our students are able to give us the information that we need in order for us to validate that learning has actually happened. All right, so now we're going to take a look at some content and then we'll go back to our thought-provoking question. So these are the three common mistakes that you want to avoid. And ultimately, hopefully, it's going to help you go back, take a look at the rubrics that you're using right now, and enhance them so that we are providing meaningful feedback to our students. So vagueness leads to the lack of clarity in the goals that we want students to achieve in an assignment. Having clear goals, they are essential in order for our rubrics to be effective, in order for them to truly give students a framework to follow that will lead us to validating that learning has happened. And we want all of our students to achieve that high score on an essay or on a discussion post, right? Because that is going to help us feel more confident and ultimately to validate competency with our students. Second, we want to think about the language that we're using. We don't want to create language barriers, and we don't want students to not understand the terminology that we're using. And we're going to be able to do that by making sure that we're aligning the language that we're using with the actual content in the course and learning objectives that are listed in the course as well. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our thought-provoking question before we get too deep. And then we'll go back to our content to make sure everybody is on the same page and that we don't lose anybody as we move forward on the journey. Assessment team is working on standardizing rubrics in the pre-licensure program. Which rubric design principle best enhances student learning and grading consistency? So we have three choices. I want you to think about the rationale for the correct option as well as the incorrect option. Use categories to cover the major aspects of the assignment is A. B is include subjective language to allow for faculty discretion. Or C, align each rubric row with measurable course outcomes. First thought is, what is this question really asking me? Second thought is, what is it that I know for sure about content related to this question? Okay. So what's your answer? Go ahead and write it down on your study worksheet, or you may write it down on a sheet of paper, okay, if you don't have your study worksheet in front of you. The reason why we want you to write it down is because we know research tells us when we physically write, that's right, putting pen to paper or pen to tablet, because I know many colleagues do use a tablet to take notes, then we're able to retain the information. Some statistics say 50% more. Some say upwards of 70 to 80% more when we physically write it down. Okay, so if you're using our study workbook, you already know that we do have specific pages in that workbook to help you do exactly that. We want you to take time to put pen to paper and then to reach out to us if you have any questions about content to make sure you're closing your knowledge gaps. All right, so let's go back to our content as we wrap up a few pointers, and then we will answer our thought-provoking question and in our time together today. So next, we're going to take a look at what are your next steps, right? So we've talked about two of the mistakes that we make when it comes to looking at a rubric that's going to hopefully provide clarity for students. So let's talk about what is that third misstep, that third mistake that we make related to the rubric, okay? And I know that some of you may be able to relate to some of these challenges, and that's okay, right? This journey is about getting a little bit better tomorrow and today than we were yesterday. Third is ignoring feedback, student feedback. This prevents improvement of the rubric. We want to gather information from our students once they submit the assignment we graded, especially if it was a large gap between how students thought they scored on that assignment and how they actually scored when it comes to a paper or a discussion or any other independent assignment that should have used a rubric, but maybe we didn't, or maybe we really didn't develop a strong enough rubric to help our students close those knowledge gaps. So now that we know what our steps should be when it comes to writing an effective rubric, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do different? Well, next, let's talk about some of the why. So why is it so important for us to write rubrics, effective rubrics, to ultimately help our students learn? All right, so this is what I want you to consider. First of all, when we are developing rubrics, it's really not for us, right, as much as it is for our students. So when we're thinking about what it is that we want to achieve, we want to provide clarity, right? Because what happens when we use rubrics that are vague, have too much content, or not aligned with outcomes, students are confused. We are not able to consistently grade our assignments, and we get a lot of angry emails, right? And frustrated students. It's not that we didn't try, right? Our goal was not to help students, or our goal was not to lead students in a way that was confusing. It's just that we didn't translate expectations into those measurable, meaningful criteria. So here's what we want you to do. We want you to think about how are you going to build rubrics that actually work, right? How are we going to make them more effective so ultimately our students can achieve their goal and we can be happy giving them grades that they've earned, right? So we want to, first of all, write those clear expectations. That's crucial. This is going to help students more actively participate, hopefully, in the assignment and meeting those assignment goals that we expect them to. So when we're using language, let's talk about clarity. So 75% improvement in students' performance on assignment when we use clarity, right? When we're clear about exactly what we expect. So if we have phrases like demonstrate understanding, that can be unclear. What do we mean by demonstrate understanding? So we could use action verbs and observable outcomes, such as applies 3 or more evidence-based sources to support the argument, or two resources that's really going to align the content with the evidence, right? We want to see that students have taken that extra time to really align their input, their feedback, their specific content that they're including in that assignment with the evidence. Second is engagement. So when we talk about engagement, we want students to be clear about what we're expecting to include an assignment that's going to allow us to give more meaningful and timely feedback, right? Because students know what it is that we expected, and it's going to allow us to be clear about how we expect students to improve in the future. So this means that we're going to focus on what matters most in that assignment. We're going to be clear about what essential behaviors are expected or descriptors are expected if it's a written assignment. And remember that less is more as it relates to giving students specifics around what we expect them to comprehend or understand as a result of the content that they have presented or the content that they are discussing if it's a debate, as an example. And then we want to make sure we are starting with the outcome in mind, right? So think about a backwards design model where we begin with the end in mind. What are these specific learning outcomes, these behaviors that we expect students to demonstrate as a result of the assignment that they have submitted? All right, so let me give you an example. When it comes to debates, if students are talking about the pros and cons associated with mandated patient care ratios, right? I can remember having this exact debate when I was in California many years ago when the ratios were first announced. So as an example, students can talk about the specific behaviors or missed opportunities or adverse events that our nurses are going to commit if they do not have a maximum number of patients. So they could bring in evidence related to adverse events and sentinel events, right? It could lead to mortality, but they're going to talk about what happens when nurses don't have the resources they need. What happens when nurses have too many patients to take care of, right? We can only do one thing at a time. So they're going to talk about those nursing students who believe that nurse-patient ratios are important and lead to, when we don't have a maximum number of patients assigned, it can lead to patient death, right, and patient harm. So they're going to bring in the literature and the evidence. If I wasn't clear as an educator about what I expect the debate to be about, if I don't have specific parameters and detailed descriptions about what I'm looking for in a debate, you can see how quickly that debate could go south and students can become disengaged and just unclear about what the goal is of the debate. All right, so this is one other point I want to make. When it comes to rubrics, if we are not clear about formatting, okay, so if we don't say to our students, okay, I expect you to include a reference in your discussion post and cite it in APA format, and I expect you to respond to 3 different peers on 3 different days or to me. Well, that is not, I'm given very clear directions, but if I avoid including those details, then it can lead to inconsistent grading, right? The 40% consistency. Implementing consistent rubrics can reduce grading time by 40%, allowing us as educators to focus more on teaching and providing that personalized support that we know is so important with our students. All right, so if our rubrics don't reflect what we actually teach, it does not allow us to assess learning in the way that we need to. Okay, so it's not just about luck and students feeling like, oh, I lucked out, I scored great on that assignment. No, we want to provide clear direction about our students' work that we expect so that they can do well and so that we can validate that learning has actually happened. All right, so how do you feel? What's your number? Maybe you're waiting to see what the answer is to the thought-provoking question, but what I want you to do a little bit of an assessment, a self-assessment on right now is yourself. So how do you feel about the content related to those rubrics and your alignment with these evidence-based practices? 1, you feel like you're lost, you're not sure exactly what we talked about, or 5, you feel like you're ready to teach, okay? Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle. We want to share this testimonial from a colleague that says, Dr. Sellars Educate is an excellent source for not only CNE study, but to inform the practice of nurse educators. Any instructor or course would be improved by having faculty skilled, knowledgeable, and given attitude developed from this educational content. Well, we know attitudes are important, so we appreciate, as we always do, feedback from colleagues that are on the journey for CNE, for renewal, or to become a better nurse educator. So let's wrap up by taking a look at the thought-provoking question. So let's see how many of you chose the correct option. All right, so here we go. What was your answer? The correct answer is C. All right, so round of applause for colleagues that chose C. Let's talk about the rationale. So alignment with measurable outcomes ensures that what is assessed reflects the desired learning. It creates clarity for the student and grading consistency for us in our role. So chapter 16 is going to give you more content. It's going to help you go a little bit deeper in clarifying any muddy points that you have. As we're helping our students move forward on their journey to achieve success on assessments, our goal is that learning has actually happened, that we're able to validate that learning in a way that empowers our students to have that knowledge that they need to carry into that clinical space. Patricia Benner talks about the importance of our work, really focusing on not only the clinical skills that students should have in the clinical setting, but we want to introduce and ultimately have those hands-on psychomotor experiences in the classroom as well, engaging in debate, using rubrics to clarify what the assignment requirements are, engaging in those discussions with specifics around the measurable outcomes that we're expecting our students to achieve and how students can earn the highest score possible. We're moving forward on this journey together, and we look forward to seeing you in our next snapshot, or maybe you're going to join us in our monthly boot camp or CNE in 60 days. You can find information about all of our resources right here in the description, and we look forward to seeing you in the next snapshot. Have a great one, everybody.